About 21 years ago, at about 5:30 p.m. one afternoon, I was part of a group that was prepping a senior vice president for a presentation he would be doing to Wall Street on earnings later that week. And while we were there, a call came in that notified me that my son, who was a few months old, had been bitten by another child in daycare. Now, this had happened early in the morning, and the daycare provider, being afraid of letting us know, had not told my husband or myself. So this had gone on all day, and the problem had become really bad to the point where my son's cheek was now severely swollen and very hard. And so she was reaching out, terrified that something was really wrong. My husband had gotten the call and he was notifying me, and he had now talked to our doctor, and she said we had to rush my son to Children's Hospital. It was that bad. I stopped what I was doing, having been at work for about 9.5 hours, and I went over to my manager and I said to him, I really need to leave. My child is being taken to the hospital. Now, what was very evident was that my manager was irritated that this presentation that needed to go ahead so that his manager was fully prepped for Wall Street would not happen the way he wanted to. And so, without any empathy or care for me and my child or my family, he turned to me and he said, well, clearly someone needs to figure out their priorities. And by priorities, he did not mean my son who was on his way to the hospital. So I grabbed my things and in tears, I ran out the door and got to Children's Hospital. And when I got there and my husband and I were waiting on the doctor, when the doctor came out and asked us if we knew of the other child that had hepatitis, we were just devastated and really worried because the problem had now seemed worse than we even thought. Later on, they told us that he would be there for several days because it was just really bad. And we couldn't quite figure out why a simple bite had seemed to have devastated this little baby of ours so much, but that's what we were now dealing with. I also remember that I needed to leave for a wedding in Toronto, which we now knew was going to happen. So that's what was before us. But what struck me was the fact that, in a very short period of time, I was this working professional who had just graduated from grad school, was on a professional path, very happy that I'd finally sort of made my dream job. And now I was trying to figure out childcare and what would happen to my son. My husband and I had a chat that night, and just because someone needed to be at the hospital, we made a decision that I would need to stay back. And this was 20 something years ago, as I mentioned. And we made a decision largely based on who earned more. And while today's discussion is certainly not around gender pay equity, that's also another discussion that we need to have, because certainly parity was not even evident in my own household on that day. But we had to move quickly because I had no backup plan. There was no plan B around childcare. There was no extended family around us. I couldn't, sort of hand off to my mom and say, can you manage this week while we figure this out? And so while my son was in the hospital, I needed to make a decision. And the decision I made was to go in the next morning and to hand my resignation to my boss and told him I'd figured out my priorities. I knew then that that's a boss I would not want to work for going forward. And it took me that long to find out. But for me, when we have crises, and all of us as individuals will, it doesn't mean that we don't care about our jobs or that we don't know what we need to do. I guarantee you that anyone that has someone die or someone gets sick and they need to rush out of work are still very aware of what their responsibilities are, and that in their brains, they're still trying to figure out, how do I make this work? How do I manage this well? And so not to be given the opportunity to say, this is a one-time event, but that I know you will turn up every time for your job, um, was something that I was very disappointed in. So what happened then, my boss was surprised that, I would quit, but he didn't give me any choices, and it didn't make me feel like I would be able to take the time that I needed for my son. So that's the backdrop of what happened, that I was handed some lemons, and I didn't make lemonade immediately, but I certainly needed to figure out, where do I go from here? And I think I want to also acknowledge that I was disappointed and I was angry. Um, and I think largely because, one, being a professional, I wanted to stay in the workforce. And I also knew that I wanted to be a mother. And to me, those things can run concurrently, and that I didn't have to choose. And it strikes me that here we are in 2021, having come out of one of our worst years in 2020, and we're still trying to figure out how to make the workforce accessible for women that want to work, and how to provide them the type of support that will allow them to be successful. And while I wasn't as skilled as I am now, I certainly was educated. And here we are losing generations of women. And we've told ourselves that it's okay, that we can't figure out childcare, the only developed country in the world that still haven't figured out how to do this, and that we're here saying it's okay to let many of our women leave the workforce. And so, according to a recent report from McKinsey, 1 in 4 women will leave the workforce this year or next, and many exited last year. And the group most affected by exits were people that look like me, Black women. And so while today's discussion is certainly not around working women, it was certainly relevant to my life 21 years ago, and it's still relevant to many of the women's lives that we know today. So I would be remiss not to mention. So while I haven't set up shop and made millions, I certainly was intrigued by this quote of the many ways that we certainly can add value and figure out how to use lemons. So I find that striking. So as Amy introduced, I am Elaine Dickson, and I am the CEO of Mavenly Consultants. This is sort of my second trip around in the business. I took a break a few years ago because I just needed some long-term self-care, but I'm back in business, and I certainly look forward to engaging with many of you. Thank you so much for joining me today here to hear a little bit about my story. I know you have a lot of competing items that you could certainly be some other place. So I appreciate that you have chosen to spend your time here with me today. So I've told you a little bit about the backstory of how I got to where I am today. So what I didn't have, and I want to talk about today, is the benefits of having some sort of plan. What I learned from having done this that I think might be beneficial to someone listening today. So what I needed to do very shortly after having what I called my pity party. So I did cry a lot. I'd had multiple offers when I left grad school. I'd chosen this one option with a global bank. And I was really starting to get sort of the professional skills I needed to be able to be an effective team member, but just also a professional. So I was devastated. And I took some time to cry because I think that's important to get it out of your system. But then I knew I needed to move fast. And what I lacked at the time that I remember so concretely was having a vast network, a network that I could turn to say, here I am, I'm going to take this risk. I have no idea what I'm doing. This is not what I planned for my life. Where do I go from here? And so, I look to Facebook because Mark has done a lot of things well. And what he assures us is that the biggest mistake we can make is not taking any risk. And so what was interesting about my situation is that I didn't have a lot of choices. I had just graduated school, as I mentioned, and my husband and I were fairly young in our careers, so we didn't have sort of savings to sort of lean into and spend months trying to figure this out. So I needed to move fast. And the first thing I did was I made a conscious decision that I had to audit myself. Like, Elaine, what are you good at? What are your strengths? What are your gaps? And then the next thing I said to myself, I know I need to be vulnerable with some folks that will help me figure this out, that I have to go out there and say, look, this is not what I planned for my life, but this is where I am. And this is what I need. And how can you help me? So those were the two immediate things that I did in a matter of very short time, probably a few weeks, because I was in a crisis. But what about you? I know for a lot of folks, change is really hard. You're thinking about the risk of leaving a job. And especially, I think, here in the US, because for so many of us, and maybe all of us, our healthcare is tied to our jobs. So if you leave your job and you're not sure about what you want to do, you're also probably walking away from your healthcare, which is a very, very important part of sort of our whole ecosystem. The other piece of this is that, you know, you have a job that has benefits, maybe, and certainly pays a salary. And so you're walking away from something that's sure, but risk is inherent in life. And if you're going to be able to be an entrepreneur, it will require you taking some deep breaths, but finally stepping out. But so if you're deciding to do that, one of the first steps that I recommend is the same self-audit that I did. What are your strengths? What are you passionate about? What's this idea that you have? And equally important, what are your gaps? Because those gaps will need to be filled by someone. Either you'll be paying for that service or you'll be getting a mentor or something. But having done that audit and having done really taking a look at your idea. Now, what's your unique selling proposition? What idea do you have that will stand out from others? And crucially, can it be monetized? Going into business for yourself is the idea of making money. Eventually, you want to make a profit. And so it could be a great idea, but can you make money from it? So that's the first step. And then I always say, sanity test it. We think sometimes that we have very great ideas and we tell them to the people that know us most. And they might say, nah, that's not you. Or yeah, that's really you. That's a really great idea. I think you should run with it. And I say, don't get people that will just tell you what you want to hear. You really need some honest family members and friends that you can bounce these ideas off. Can this work? This is what I'm thinking. And have them also give you some feedback. I cannot overemphasize enough that you do research. Unless you have this really, really cool idea that no one has ever thought about, you'll find information on it somewhere out there. So research your idea. Talk to librarians, talk to other business folks, talk to, Rhode Island Hub, Social Enterprise Greenhouse, Venture Café, all these places that are local, certainly for us, nationally, the Small Business Administration, SCORE with mentors, all of the resources that will be able to help you. And then once you think your idea is really solid, then continue to hone that idea and to really hone your brand along the way, because that will be really critical. Until you're known like a Google or Apple, you're it. You're that brand. You're everything about it. And the more you put into researching, the more important and successful that idea will be. And networking, I talked about, certainly for me, that was a deficit at the time when I had to step out of corporate. That because I was also a fairly new immigrant to this country, I didn't know a lot of folks. I didn't have a wide network, and I certainly didn't have a lot of family members that lived around me. So it was really, really hard to just reach into a network and say, I am struggling. Can you help me? You cannot be in this business without having a network. And I always say, get it before you need it. And certainly also learn to look for experts and be willing to pay them is also another critical piece of this. Now, I grew up in Jamaica, in a pretty rural part of Jamaica most of my life. My mom owned a convenience store. I tell my friends all the time, no one can out hustle me because I learned how to hustle from my mom. So for me, even though I fell out sort of my dream job and I decided to start a business, one of the things I was so confident in, even though I had no idea what I was going to do, was that I knew how to hustle. I grew up in my mom's convenience store. I was always comfortable around money, around transactions, around negotiations. So I had had some unskilled skills that I could turn into something for a business. And then I am the type of person that has always loved a range of things. I consider myself to be sort of this lifelong learner. I'm trained as, in accounting, but I'm also trained in journalism. So I have really good research skills. And, I know the business side. And so I had all of these benefits coming in where, for some folks that are starting a business, maybe your idea is in art or music or something, and then you need a business person and you need a lawyer. At least I knew that I had assets coming from the business side. So that helped me tremendously. And what I found out as well is that my vulnerability with people allowed me to have some sponsors. And sponsors are so critical when you do any type of work. I've never fully bought into this idea that we pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. I think most of us, for most of our lives, have had people that help us along the way. So for me, that was a critical component as well, that I could seek out mentors, that I had folks that I could really have a conversation with, sit down for a coffee, or pay for some service that helped me to build that suite of skills that I needed. And probably, really honestly, I had no choice. Like I mentioned, I didn't have deep pockets. I still don't, for those who are wondering. And so I had to figure out a way to make a living. We certainly needed to be a two-income family at the time that I was stepping out of corporate. So when you're out of options in terms of, how do I make a living, you find a way to do it. So I would credit certainly these four things largely for me being able to start a business and succeed at that business. I learned a lot of things. I'm still learning, but network is key. And it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of hours, but the benefits certainly outweigh any of the time that it will take from you. And cultivate that network before you need it, because when you start a business and you're just starting to brand yourself and very little people maybe in the business world, or certainly no one wants to give you that first job because everyone wants 3 to 5 referrals, and your family and friends will be that core that will help you find that first person. Even without you knowing it, they will be the person that is in that room saying, trust John, trust Jane. I know I can vouch for that person that they will do a good job. So make sure that you're telling as many people as you can about this, but also that you are supporting friends and family that are currently in business, so that you are being part of an ecosystem that supports one another. That's really critical. I say get comfortable with the word free. And part of what I've certainly noticed in our current environment, and certainly of this generation, is that they're looking for thought leaders, and they're looking for people that have blogs and podcasts and newsletters and interact on social media and all of these things. It takes a ton of time. And I think you sort of have to figure out which one would possibly work for you. This is not going to be for everyone, but certainly I think a lot of people will opt into this as a way to be engaged. As we have seen, digital transformation accelerated at a pace about the speed of light in the last year and a half. And being able to be comfy on social media and interacting with clients and offering them something. So for example, I do a blog, which I offer, whether it's accounting or strategy or finance or, diversity, just knowledge for free that people are able to tap into and start those conversations and start those relationships, which will be so critical. Number 3 is probably my favorite. Slow down to go faster. I think as someone who mentors in different places, I see a lot of enthusiastic entrepreneurs, and we love to see passion because that will keep you, especially when you hit those bumps in the road. But have a plan. Do a nice rollout when you decide to go live so that you're not correcting mistakes. Make sure your social media, everything works, your website, all of those little things. Make sure that grammar is correct and that their spelling is checked. All of the things that we take for granted, but they make an impression and they form part of your brand. So slow down to go faster. I cannot overemphasize the need to do that. I would say embrace risk and failure like they are a child that you love, because they will happen. So much of this is about taking a risk, and you will have failures. They don't have to be permanent, and you should be learning from them. What I would say is don't be making the same mistakes again, but you'll be making new ones. But each time take a lesson from them, learn something, and you will certainly be building on that. And my last point I'd make here is have an exit strategy. What's your plan? What if someone wanted to buy you? What if you wanted to bring on a new partner? All of these things are important as you think about sort of the long game. Even as you're starting a business, it's important to know where you're going and where that exit is. And what does success look like for you? You have to be in rooms where you're comfy when, millionaires are talking. And what if you don't want to be one? That's okay. And I think it's so important that you know what success looks like for you. I said to my husband recently that, I've never had a dream of wanting to be sort of a Jeff Bezos or any person that was really, really rich, because I like lots of free hours in the day. And I could see that I startled him. But that's never my goal. And I have to know what my goal is for myself, because I love to travel. I love spending time with family, and I love lying with a book. And if it means that 24 hours a day is what it requires to be a billionaire, I don't have it. And so I need to know what Elaine's goals are in order to live Elaine's life. And so having a clear sense of what your exit strategy or what success looks like for you will be really, really critical on this journey as well. Another quote that I love: the only impossible journey is the one that you never begin. I'm just motivating you to get started if you're there and you're still contemplating. Now, for someone who barely listens to rap, I was captivated by Lil Wayne and this quote. And so it helps me feel younger than I am. So here it is. The more time you spend contemplating what you should have done, you lose time planning for what you ought to be doing. And I think that is so true, that even as we are aware of how scary it is to change what we're doing over and over again, it's so critical that we're able to shift and that we're able to pivot when time calls for it. Whatever that idea, that dream is that you want to do, there's never been a better time. In fact, the Wall Street Journal had an article out this week that more people were exiting the workforce than ever because they were either looking for a hybrid or a remote work environment that doesn't currently exist for them, and they were looking to start their own thing. So the future of work will look very differently, and I can see a lot more entrepreneurs tapping into that. As I think about what I could leave you with as I try to wrap up and hopefully have a conversation with all of you around some questions, things that came to mind. Unplanned events can turn into windows of opportunity. As I think about sort of even the disruption that has happened in the last year, we're going to see a lot of new companies come out of that. And this could also be you. That most opportunities happen when we get disruption. And certainly for my life, it's a disruption that caused my opportunity to happen where I said, what if I did this myself? What if I was able to more be in control of my own schedule, of my own time? Certainly, it's something that is possible. One of the other things, as I continue to use this analogy around lemons, is to squeeze the lemons when you have it. What are the add-ons that could lend value to whatever idea or business that you have? You need to be thinking about that as well as you're scoping sort of any business plan, thinking about any goals, any sort of analysis around who do you want to be. Also be thinking about, especially I think in an environment where certainly customers are much more adept in the marketplace, and also probably also less likely to stay with you if they don't figure you're adding on a lot of value for them. And be honest with yourself, as I spoke about before. Seek the advice of others and build a network before you need it. And lastly, risk is certainly inherent in life. Learn to embrace it, but also slow down to go faster. But at some point, you have to wade in the water. Now, I would also like just to end with some, what I consider to be good news that, I certainly don't want to leave the idea that a child upended my life. And I certainly know I had enough time to figure out other childcare options after a while. But I think what the opportunity gave me was a chance to reflect and to think about, how do I really want to live my life? And what happens when there's no plan B? And so even this situation for me provided opportunities for me to think about my life very differently. And I'm happy to say that I have a junior in college, that 21-year-old, he's alive and well, and will be graduating next week. So I do have that very tangible success to look at, even if I didn't have my own. So the choices I certainly made around motherhood were also very good ones. And for those that choose that path, it's certainly a wonderful one. I know for myself that I wanted to be a mother and I also wanted to work. And that I think the two can meld really well when we provide the support systems that are needed for women. So my thanks is so huge for all of you again that decided to join me today. I wanted to leave time for questions and conversation, and I hope that you will engage with me at a level that will just take this over the top. Thank you so much.
That was fantastic. And I so have some similar experiences in that searching for childcare struggle. And I think that's something that a lot of the parents and families on this call probably can relate to, especially over the last year. But I don't need to monopolize the conversation. Does anybody have any questions or comments or thoughts that they want to share as we kind of delve into the conversational aspects of this session? Toonie?
Elaine, wow. I don't know if you saw it in the chat, but I said, I love and appreciate these types of true entrepreneurial stories, and greatly appreciate you being so human and transparent. And I think this recording is going to be a mantra for Innovation Studios. We work with a lot of want to be entrepreneurs as well as established entrepreneurs. And I think this was fantastic. So thank you.
Thank you.
My question is, can you share with us like what you do at Mavenly Consultants and like how you help businesses grow?
Sure, thank you for that. So I do have a part 2 on July 29th, which I'll talk a lot more about Mavenly as a strategic partner. So I didn't want to delve too much in that today. So we serve primarily small and mid-sized businesses, and we have a team of 5 that work together to offer the full suite. So from accounting, finance, HR, we partner with another firm to offer HR as well as tax services. And so the full range of services that any business might need, from startup So if you are just looking for someone to help you figure out what's the right strategy, do you need a strategic plan? That's something we also be able to do. If you're sort of in a growth stage and you're looking for someone to help you figure out that life cycle, what's the decision I should be making next? So that's something we can help with as well. If you're looking for someone to manage your books, that's something we can do. Someone to help you think about sort of tax strategy. What's the best strategy for my business based on what I'm trying to do for the next 5 to 10 years? That's a service we offer as well. So the range is there. I do have a soft spot, and every time I say this, some of my business partners look at me. But I love nonprofit work. So I'm always looking for startup businesses that are new because I understand how that feels. So I do have a soft spot, but I'm also very happy to engage with others who are much farther along in that journey as well.
Mia, do you have a question?
I do. Hi, Elaine. Good morning,
Hi.
everybody. So,
Hi, Mia.
Elaine, how are you?
Good, thank you. Good to see
Awesome.
you.
You too. So, you talked about risk and overcoming risk. Can you, give us an example of how you mustered the courage? Like, what was that tipping point that said, okay, I'm going to do this?
Right. So the transparency that Tony talked about, I did not have a lot of money. So I had just moved to the US about 6 or 7 years before this happened. So I came here without the skill sets of knowing even how to use a computer. So I'd gone to computer school, then I went to undergrad by night, fully by night. And then during the daytime, I was working at Boston Food Bank. I was sorting dented cans, the canned food they give to the homeless. They try to pick out the ones that are dented. So that was my job. So because I had no sort of professional skills or very little, because I did temp for a few financial firms, I was going into this workforce knowing that I needed this job to really grow my skills. So when this happened, and then I had to leave, the risk I had to take was that I needed to find people that would believe in me, that knew the person I was, and that would be willing to speak on my behalf. And in order for me to do that, because you're making an ask of folks, I knew I had to be vulnerable with them. And so I just threw sort of, this pride out the window. And when I started to make my ask, I'm like, look, I need to find work and I need to find it soon, even before I have a business plan or have thought about what I truly want to do. And so the first job I had in terms of clients who gave me actually a fairly big job, I didn't have sort of life figured out yet, but I'd taken a risk to ask the right persons who had put me in touch with the right persons. And I was going to make sure that I did not fail at that one because I needed to be sort of my referral for others.
I have a question about when you initially said the first thing you had to do was take an inventory or like audit yourself.
Yeah.
What did you do and how did you do it so quickly as you kind of?
Yeah, and it's I think it's one we ought to be self-aware. So it's something that you should have some sense of. For example, I always know, and when I was in undergrad, most of my accounting teachers told me that I have strong attention to detail. And so all of them encouraged me to go into auditing. You have such strong attention to detail. So I knew that's the strength I had. I'm super organized. That's something I know about myself as well. And so I could quickly run down a list of some things that I knew were really good strengths. I can write well. I can research well. I'm trained, as a journalist, as I mentioned as well. And I can strategize and quickly distill information. So when I'm in a session with a client, I like to be relational. I'm listening, but I'm also hearing everything and can distill into quick points to reconnect or to connect with them. And, is this what you're saying, sort of thing. So I knew those were things that, were really good strengths for me. But I actually sat down with a list, and had like strong, areas of opportunity. I'm very impatient. It runs. Yeah, I am very impatient. So I am gone like yesterday for today's work. So I knew that's also something that goes slow to go faster. I am speaking to me. And so it was really critical that I made sure that the strength of being organized and detail oriented was getting above sort of, my impatience.
Thank you. Yeah, I have often thought about that in my own career path, and not that I am, ready to step out on my own or anything, but like, how do you but I love that. And what it reminds me of is, I have interns that work for me, and making sure they know what I see as their strengths.
Right.
So that can help too.
And those gaps, because you're going to need someone to fill those gaps.
Yeah.
That's really important, that we don't have to be everything. And we have to be able to also delegate, right? So if you're not strong at something, it's okay to give it to the person that's strong at it, right? Even if you're the boss. That, Elaine, I know you write really well. Why don't you take the lead on this? I mean, clearly, your manager is still going to review it, but it's the same thing, even being an entrepreneur. I find that in our work, I see so many entrepreneurs doing, for example, their own books. And then when you speak to them and say, okay, who else is helping you do the business development that you need to do for your business? And, when you are the main person with an idea, especially a really unique idea that not many other persons within that firm, can replicate, you really need to think about, how you're spending your time, because often it's not the place that you need to be if you're not really thinking about doing a self-audit.
Definitely. And if you can invest your time better, you can grow your company more than the cost of outsourcing or
exactly. And also that you're not burning out, because that's the other piece, that as entrepreneurs, when we're doing everything, we risk burnout. And so many of us, if we get sick, that's really critical loss for the business. So I haven't looked at the chat. I'm just going to peek in to see what it's saying.
Definitely. Okay. And while you're doing that, maybe Michelle, if you're comfortable unmuting, could you tell us what you're doing as you're...
Sure. Hi, Elaine. How are you? Thanks for sharing.
Hi, Michelle. How are you? Thank you for coming.
Yeah, I am in the medical device product development industry. So I had worked almost 15 years at local companies. I Medica, parted ways with them, and had the privilege of being able to take some time to reflect, like Elaine said, do that self audit, and recently, within the past couple months, started as an independent consulting. So started with consulting and helping small mid businesses with medical device product development from a overall strategy and planning and development perspective, and also from that quality side of things. So definitely a lot of what Elaine said really resonated, and some great reminders too of what to make sure I should make sure I'm doing. Like she said, slow down to go faster and have a plan. I could definitely relate to like trying to do everything. I've been telling a few people, I feel like I've taken everything from my career and you're distilling it all into myself, which has been very exciting to kind of flex all those different muscles. But I definitely appreciate hearing Elaine's perspective to make sure to keep that balance and filling gaps and recognizing gaps and getting help.
Yes.
So thank you.
Oh, good luck on the journey.
Thank you.
I'm looking, forward to hearing a lot more about that.
Yes.
Tuni's got a new background image. Sorry, I just got distracted.
Yeah, I know. It's so exciting. For those who are on the call, I'll be back on, is it July 29 to talk about finance as a strategic partner. So I hope you'll join me then and share it with others as well. But we'll delve into a lot more about sort of the work that I do and how important it is, from going to get a loan at a bank to just, having good books and all of those things, how we're really strategic partners for all that you do, and that it's such a critical role.
Excellent. Yeah.
So nice to see so many friendly faces on and such kind comments. Thank you all.
Elaine, I would like to ask you one more question that we ask almost everybody.
Sure.
Why are you in Rhode Island? What brought you here, and what
Oh, wow.
caused you to
Why am
open
I
your
in
business
Rhode
here?
Island? Yeah, it's a good question. So I actually lived in Mass before Rhode Island and had kids that were coming to school in Providence. And we kept traveling back and forth. And I said, it's sort of ridiculous to get, one, make such an investment in a school in Rhode Island, and two, to develop such great friends and still live across the border is what I called it. So we decided when we were looking for a new home that I think we should really check out the state. And I love Rhode Island because it's so easy to wrap your hands around, like, and you can always find parking. And if you live in Mass, you understand this. Like, you can drive to Providence and know you'll find parking. I mean, you're going to Boston and that's the big worry. Will I find any parking anywhere? Sort of like New York. But Rhode Island is just so cool, and and you get to meet sort of everybody. Yeah, it's very easy to get around. So yeah, that was sort of my big deal.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. So excited to hear that and to learn why you're here.